Fabulous. All right. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. My name is Joel Cardel. I'll give you some info about me, although you probably don't care, and that's okay. My name is Joel. I am a senior security consultant at Rapid7. I've been in the business about 20 years, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter, depending on when you start measuring. And I've done a lot of different stuff. I've seen a lot of different things. I just came off a gig of being the CISO level, Director of Information Security for a multinational manufacturing organization. Did that for a few years, but have done a lot of other stuff in my life. And I have seen some things that are somewhat disturbing, I guess, is the best way to put it. And so when I talk about why you're the only person concerned about what you do, that comes from a slightly cynical place, but also from a place of some experience of trying to deal with security issues over the years and really not have them go the way that you want them to go. So I'm going to show you some things that I believe contribute to that philosophy, that thought, and some things that maybe we can do to get around that. So here we go. So fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Okay, FUD. It's sort of a favorite tactic of security people. My phone, of course. It's my wife, I tell you. She has the worst timing ever. Just turn that off. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is a tool that security people have used for a long time to get decisions made. But really, we cannot do this anymore because fear, uncertainty, and doubt just simply don't work as tools. They still exist. It's still a thing. It's still out there. I believe it's changed, and I'll talk about that change in a little bit. But we really have to get away from thinking about things in FUD terms and really think about things more in terms of how our businesses and our executives are thinking about them. So when we talk about data breaches, right, we talk about the cost of data breaches. And in 2015, Ponemon puts out a report. Everybody puts out a report. I just picked Ponemon's in this case. And they basically say that the average record cost for a lost or stolen record is about $145 in 2014 and $154 in 2015. And they figure out all kinds of things about that, what it costs to recover, what it costs in support, what it costs, yada, yada, yada. They break it down. And it's a good number, I guess. And you can use it as a number, as a thing. But what I have found when I talk to people is in a lot of organizations, they don't really care about that number. It doesn't really mean anything. When we talk about electronic data, they can't put a hard number around it because when it comes to support or operations or things like this, these are sunk costs. Companies are paying for these anyway. So executives don't look at this as a number that they have to be concerned about. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but it's something that's out there. It's a tool. You have data out there. So this is a screen cap from privacyrights.org, which is a web page that tracks all kinds of data breaches. And it's a great place to go because you can do searches, you can do lookups, and it gives you all kinds of really, really good information on stuff. As you'll see, I ran one here on the most recent Experian breach. 15 million records. It was a hack. This is a code that they use. That's medical. This is business services or something. And then they tell you more about it, and then I had to cut that off because there's a bunch of information there. But it's a really good resource to give you data on data breaches and things. There's sites like Information is Beautiful, where they did some visualized data of the world's biggest data breaches. And they show you on this bubble chart where the size of the bubble represents a larger breach in comparison to everything else, right? And you can even pivot that data, and you can look at, instead of the size of the breach, you can look at the data sensitivity. So while Adobe may have been small in terms of size, it was large in terms of sensitivity because PII got out there, right? Personally identifiable information. And that's the stuff we really care about because the PII is what's regulated. That's what people have to pay fines for if they lose. That's what they have to follow regulatory things about, right? So you can see all this stuff out there. The information's out there is sort of the point here. But when we talk about the cost of doing business, and we talk about, $150 a record, right? What does that really mean? What does that really look like? So when I was thinking about this, at the same time, Dave Shackelford put out a blog post that I have stolen with impunity, and I really appreciate him doing all this work for me. So essentially, what he's saying here is, I looked at some companies who had large data breaches from the Information is Beautiful site. And what I did was, I looked at when they announced their data breach, and I looked at the price of their stock. And then I looked at what the price of their stock is now, as of the result of this blog post, right? This was many months ago. as you can see, we have a fairly upward trend for, what is this, Heartland? Heartland Payment Systems had a big PCI breach, if you recall. Similar so, this is TJ Maxx, right? TJX. They had a breach announcement back in 2007, and this is what they look like today. Can you see a pattern emerging here? Right? Here's Adobe. We just looked at Adobe. Adobe had a big sensitive records breach, right? This is what their stock price looked like, somewhere around $50. It's somewhere around $80 today. Okay, what is that? 50%? A little more than 50%? Here's Global Payments, another PCI breach, right? They announced their breach in 2012. This is what it looks like today. Their stock was hovering around 40, and it's like at almost 100. So whatever they're doing it right, because their shareholders love them. And then, of course, there's Target, which we've all heard about. Now, I can't talk bad about Target because our con host works for Target. But it's the same kind of thing. In November of 2014, they had a breach, and this is what they look like today. Okay? So, where is the pain and suffering as a result of these data breaches? We know they pay fines. We know that they have all of these costs to clean up, right? Target's riding a wave of security awareness right now, where they're pumping millions and millions of dollars into their security program. But it looks like this. The question in any executive's mind would be, why do we need to do that? When I look at this. And it's kind of all summed up by a tweet made by Space Rogue, where he says, they paid $1.2 billion in dividends on $21.8 billion in sales for 2014, and the data breach cost $162 million. That's the cost of doing business, right? Because it is. That's the cost of doing business. They took whatever percentage of that, I'm terrible at math, right? It's not 10%, 1%, whatever it is, off of their profit and said, oh yeah, we had this data thing we had to deal with. Boop. They threw it into the sunk cost column and moved on. But there are other costs. And because it's been fairly boring up to this point, now I'm going to entertain you with Futurama. So good news, everyone. The professor created a device which makes you read these in his voice. So we're going to look at two specific instances. We're going to look at the joy of Ashley Madison, and we're going to look at the joy of Sony Pictures, both of which suffered significant breaches far beyond the financial implications of what it did to their companies. One company is going to be out of business. The other one is going strong. I'll let you decide which. Right? So an information fire hose, troves of information were released on the inner workings of these companies. This is what our executives should be afraid of. It's not about how much money we pay out. It's not about a per record count of what it costs us. It's about, are our secrets being exposed in these data breaches? Because that really is where the meat of this problem is, right? It's not just about reputation. It's about real and actual business secrets, how we do business, how we get around the law, right, in shady ways that gets exposed in this stuff, if you look really hard. So let's take Ashley Madison, for example. Avid Life Media, the parent company of Ashley Madison, is accused of having fembots on their site, where these fembots went out and chatted up the membership and caused them to purchase transactions to chat more, right? There was a website, or Gizmodo wrote it up. One of the great quotes from the article there is, it's like a science fictional future where every woman on Earth is dead and some Dilbert-like engineer has replaced them with badly designed robots. Ouch. That's tough. But that's a company secret. That's a big deal. We could have suspected that was happening, but because of the data breach, we can prove that it was happening. And if you read that article, she goes through some steps where she offers some pretty significant proof. There's also the fact that they hacked their competitors. So their CTO, Bhatia, says in an email back to the CEO, they did a very lousy job building their platform. I got their entire user base. He included a message with a link to their Git. I can turn any non-paying user into a paying user, vice versa. Can you say Computer Fraud and Abuse Act? These are blatant violations of the CFAA, right? Krebs wrote about that one. You can read about it. It's pretty interesting. Nearly 200,000 emails written by the CEO, Noel Biderman, were made public. And we found that he was possibly having an affair. Shocker, right? We found that he wanted to brag about their security when he saw other sites getting hacked. Ironic. We found out he was trying out new ways to defraud people. He was trying to create, and this is in an email, a scheme to pump and dump stocks. You know what pump and dump is? This is where we artificially inflate the price of a stock that we have purchased. We tell other people about it, so that price goes up. We sell our stock when it's high. Everybody else takes the fall. That's illegal. And the irony of a man who starts a cheating site wanting to do a scheme called pump and dump is not lost on me. Right? You can read about it here, Business Insider. It's an interesting story. Enough about Ashley Madison, though. Let's really talk about the problem. Let's talk about Sony. So Sony got hacked. Again. If you look at privacyrights.org, they'll show you how many times Sony's been hacked. I think it was 6. And that's important to remember in a little bit. 47,000 Social Security numbers, including those of famous actors like Sylvester Stallone. Well, famous, right? Whatever. They're publicly available. Bank statements, tax forms, HIPAA and 401k information. All available in this hack. Not to mention business documents. They can be viewed by anybody with a text editor. That's also important to remember for later on. We found plain text files with passwords. This is an actual screen cap of a bunch of, it's kind of hard to read, but I'll give you some of these file names. PwC password, 50 new user passwords, 90-day admin password. That might be good to look at. Let's see, what else do we have here? There's one on here that says like bank passwords, right? Crazy. Just sitting on a PC. This is what we found in the hack, in the data that was dumped. These are actual files, by the way. That's just a screen cap of what the files look like. We found pricing data. We know what they spend on stuff, and this is huge, especially with movie theaters. Or, sorry, not movie theaters, movie companies, companies that make movies. This is a big deal because have you ever heard that a movie will gross $300 million but not make a profit? Right? Do you know why that works that way? It's called Hollywood accounting. Hollywood accounting is where everybody inside the industry buys from each other, so they never make a profit. But this exposes that. It shows exactly what each business unit paid for everything, and it shows us how they really actually do make profits, but because they use this shell game called Hollywood accounting, they can hide behind it. This is a big deal. This has been going on in Hollywood for decades. Everybody knew it, but this is the proof. That's significant. They had internal salary data that came out, and this caused a huge deal because it started to illustrate the disparity in gender gap pay at Sony. Now, in this particular case, Amy Pascal and Michael Lynton made the same amount of money. Michael Lynton is the president of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Amy Pascal was right there, too, right at his level. She did, like, content management and things. They both made $3 million a year. But all the other people on here at $2.8 million down, you can see what their salaries are. They're probably not very happy about that, now that we can see that, right? They had HIPAA-protected data. I redacted some of it, but this is a claims spreadsheet that their HR department held showing when the employees had to go out on short-term disability and what reason they went out on short-term disability for. Sitting right there in the HR department. If you work for a large company, your HR department has this data. They do. They're required to keep it by law. Are they required to secure it? They're not. Well, they sort of are, but they're not, right? Sony internal HR data. Here's a memo about an executive who took romantic trips with a subordinate employee on the company's dime and didn't get fired. That's the memo. If it was bigger, you could read it. It's redacted somewhat, but you could read that memo. All this information is in the Sony treasure trove. You can find out who this person is, who the person is that they were fraternizing with, what they did, allegedly. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Right? And then all kinds of other juicy stuff. We already talked about the spreadsheet of all the stuff, their Social Security numbers. Their entire payroll, division by division, was there. All the employees who were fired or laid off in 2014 as part of the company's reorganization. Detailed performance reviews for hundreds of Sony Pictures employees. Detailed reports of medical leaves and absences and the reason. A file with the highest cost patients on the Sony Pictures health plan contains a laundry list of expensive chronic conditions who had cancer, heart disorders, and end-stage renal disease. If you are one of those people, do you want that out there? I'm guessing you don't. But again, the company's required to keep this information because you're on their health plan. They're just not securing it, obviously. Internal memos of executive misconduct. We saw information on Deloitte salaries. This was good. So Deloitte & Touche was their auditor. Information on Deloitte salaries from an employee who was formerly with Deloitte, but had saved all the data on his Sony computer. And Sony never got rid of it. So this really wasn't even Sony's fault. It was just an asset in their control that wound up being data in their control that got out that had Deloitte salaries, because consultants are stupid and they don't segregate client data. I blame that one on Deloitte. But it's Sony's problem because it wound up in their data trove and out it went when they got breached. Right? So what does Sony have to say about this? This is Michael Lynton. This is also Michael Lynton, if you know anything about hedonism bot. In a December 2014 interview with National Public Radio, Lynton insisted his company was extremely well prepared for conventional cybersecurity, but faced the worst cyber attack in U.S. history. That is a really, really important comment. I'll talk about that in a minute. He has repeatedly described it as a highly sophisticated attack, what we might call APT, and then laugh. Sony Pictures provided written responses to questions through Robert Lawson, blah, blah, blah. He says Lynton has no plans to fire or discipline anyone. Okay, this is 2014. The CEO's reasoning rests on the belief that because Sony's assailant was a foreign government, with far more resources than a renegade band of hackers, what happened was unstoppable. The studio simply faced an unfair fight. Okay, that's fine. But let's break this down. Let's look at these words. Extremely well prepared for conventional cybersecurity. In other words, we passed our last audit. Right? The worst cyber attack in U.S. history. And they've had Congress people agree with them. That's a really important comment. Because basically that allows them to transfer the risk all away from them and go, we had no choice. We were being outnumbered and outbullied. What could we do? And Congress goes, yeah, you're right. So they're not going to hold them accountable. It was a highly sophisticated attack. No, it wasn't. Look at what happened. Somebody got phished. Somebody got phished. They got in, they pivoted, they got all the data, they exfiltrated it, and Sony never knew it. That is not highly sophisticated. That's what script kiddies do. They have no plans to fire or discipline anyone. That's really interesting. Let's look at Jason Paltrow, the VP of Information Security at Sony. That may or may not be an accurate representation of Jason Paltrow. The cost, now these are quotes from Mr. Paltrow in an article for CIO Magazine in 2007, 7 years before the breach. The cost to harden the legacy database against a possible intrusion could come to $10 million. The cost to notify customers in case of a breach might be $1 million. With those figures, it's a valid business decision to accept the risk of a security breach. I will not invest $10 million to avoid a possible $1 million loss. Here's the problem. He's right. You would be foolish, you would be stupid as a business to invest $10 million to preserve $1 million in assets. That ROI is not present. Everybody know what ROI is? Return on investment, right? That is so negative, it's ridiculous. You would not ever do that. He's absolutely right. He goes on to say there are decisions that have to be made. We're trying to remain profitable for our shareholders. We could literally go broke trying to cover for everything. Agreed. So you make risk-based decisions. What are the most important things, underline, that are absolutely required by law? Those two parts of that sentence do not go together. The most important things are not the things absolutely required by law. This is me speaking, right? But this is somebody who is focused on compliance. Focused on checking the boxes, getting the audits done, and getting them off his desk. In 2004, users are still able to use passwords such as Skateboard94 for their public-facing services. We know this because we can look at the password files that we stole, right? We can see this. Have they progressed? Absolutely not. Have they regressed? Very likely. They're certainly making good dollar decisions, right? Here's a friendly reminder to Mr. Paltrow, to anyone who will listen, that if the data represents you, you are the owner of that data. If it is your name, your address, your PII, you own that data because you are responsible for generating it. Companies who host it, collect it, buy it from a clearinghouse or otherwise are merely custodians of that data. There is a significant difference between a data owner and a data custodian. As a custodian, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the data. But they also have financial obligations to their investors and shareholders. Guess who wins? It's going to be the investors and shareholders every time. Every time. Until there is significant, serious regulation that forces it to be the other way around. Did you have a question? Okay. So the costs of acceptable risk. So Packet Ninjas put together a little blog post that I thought was interesting, and they posit some of the costs that they thought this would cost Sony. And this was right after the breach was announced, before we really knew what those things were. But they basically say they're going to have to pay for the initial incident response. Current industry rates are approximately $300 to $500 an hour per consultant, depending on the response time and the retainer. That's absolutely true. Ongoing security reviews, gap assessments, reassessments, hiring of external security experts for the security committee, council roles, likely to occur for the next 12 to 36 months. That is happening now. In the breach data, there had been a minimum of 6 business agreement documents that appeared to have HIPAA or Health and Human Services or healthcare components. So there's going to be business fines now because of that, because they violate HIPAA rules. They're going to have to pay HIPAA HHS fines for all the PII data that got exposed. California and other states have their own fines in addition to the federal HIPAA fines. There's going to be ongoing credit monitoring, which there is. And there's going to be employee lawsuits, which there was, at least 2. Both tried to submit as class action. Both got settled. Wow. Just got settled. Wonder how that happened. Right? Cost of doing business. That's how it happened. So how is Sony doing today? Let's look at their stock price. Anybody want to guess where it's at? Is it up or is it down? Do we know? Drum roll. It's up. Right? So right here, this is when the breach was announced. This is the day that they went public. And it was roughly $21 and some cents. Today, it's up here at $26 and some cents. We're only not quite a year out. The other graphs I showed you were several years of activity, but that's still a 20 to 25% increase of their stock price from when their breach was announced to where they are now. What are they doing wrong? By looking at this, you can't tell, right? So, again, in my opinion, FUD has kind of changed to an acronym that I like to call AIR, which is apathy, indifference, and resignation. And that's the approach we have now to how this data stuff happens. And it's the approach everybody has. The public has this. Security people have this. It just keeps happening over and over and over again. And you rub your head and you go, okay, it's another one. Fine, I guess. You know, we'll just keep sucking. Because that's what we're doing. That's indifference. I mean, you know, what are our choices at this point? It's really hard. So I'm going to show you a few things when I was a CISO that didn't work. Okay, so this is the what not to do section. Basically, don't ever refer to security as an insurance model. We already have enough problems right now with the cyber insurance industry. The cyber insurance industry is making all of this a reality. It's making AIR a reality. Because companies now can just wipe their hands. All right, transfer that risk. We're done. Let's move on to something else. The breach happens. We all get screwed. Insurance pays out the company for the costs of remediation. And we're all still screwed. Right? So cyber insurance, I really have a problem with right now because it's just exacerbating problems. If you were at Chris Roberts' keynote when we started the first day, he talked about what it actually takes to get cyber insurance today, and it's like a 3-question questionnaire. It's ridiculous, right? Do you have security? Do you have a firewall? Do you have audits? That's all you need. Don't use standards that don't map to your industry, or don't use apples to oranges comparison. I tried doing this. I was working in manufacturing, and I was trying to use other industries to say, look, you know, they do this in finance, and they do this in healthcare, and they do this in education, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they didn't have any ears for it. They didn't care. They didn't care that there were best practices out there, even though all of those standards covered us. Because here's what I discovered. I get a call one day from HR, And they say, hey, we have an auditor here. Can you help us? And I was the point of contact for audit. I said, absolutely. I went down. I said, how can I help you? And they said, we're here to do a HIPAA audit. I said, a HIPAA audit? I go, we're a manufacturing company. We don't have HIPAA data. And it turns out we did. For the same reasons I showed you before, because HR has to keep records and collections of everything that happens when people go out on disabilities. We did have HIPAA data on the network of which I had no exposure or understanding or knowledge of. And as a result, we had to go through a HIPAA audit, which, can you guess how we did? Probably not too well, right? Came back and said, we will fix that. And we did, and that was good. But this exists today. People don't realize that, right? If you're a publicly traded company, you've got SOX, you've got, what's the other one? I can't think of it. Oh, PCI is where I was going. If you're taking credit card data, PCI, right? There's all the stuff that's out there that you may not be aware of. That's all part of what needs to happen when we talk about data. And then don't confuse compliance with security. The big thing I'm trying to change in the industry right now is I'm trying to get people to talk about security as other things. Because right now, in the mind of the public, in the mind of the everyman, in the mind of the layman, security is this sort of thing that people do, and it's a nuisance and it's a burden. And I want to try to change the language and get us to places where it's not a nuisance and a burden, that it's things that people think about. So separate those words, define them differently, and use them in different contexts. Now, what exactly does that mean, right? Nibbler will tell us. Try different things. So when I say pivot here, I'm saying be really, really obvious that you're changing the discussion. When you're talking about this stuff with people, move away and they say, oh, security, say, no, that's not security, that's actually risk. Or when they say, oh, we need to do this for security, you go, no, that's actually governance. That's not security. We still do it. That's our responsibility, but that's actually governance, not security. Talk about these things as to what they are, right? Understand ROI, because ROI is a really big motivator for your executives, for your managers. Not just financial, but all the way around. When we talk about return on investment, what are we investing? What's the return? It's not always tangible. Sometimes it's intangible. Okay? And, really simple ROI calculations there. If X is less than Y, you're positive. If X is greater than Y, you're negative. If X equals Y, you should reevaluate. And don't always think that negative ROI is a bad thing. Negative ROI can actually work for you if you can show a case where you can go, you know what? We're paying boatloads of money for this thing, and we're really not getting a lot of value out of it. Maybe if we didn't pay for that and we instead paid for something over here, we'd get some better value. So negative ROI can actually work for you too, but it requires you to be aware of where you're spending your money, of where you're spending your time and your resources, and prove that return on investment, right? And you can have other ROI too. It's very, very complex. They need their own models, and not everything, unfortunately, can be distilled down to a mathematical formula, but it's a really, really, really good mindset to have when you're talking to people. Make the conversations about risk. Completely turn the tables. Right? Treat cybersecurity as a business risk. I break security down into 4 areas: security, governance, risk, and compliance. It's really easy to define these things. Security does these things. Governance does these things. Risk does these things. Compliance does these things. And you talk about them. And when somebody comes to you and says, oh, this thing for security, you go, no, that's compliance. But what do you need? Let's talk about that. Change their mindset. Get them to understand what you're trying to say. Go to your business. Find out how they assess risk, because I guarantee they do in some way, shape, or form. Whether you have a formal risk assessment process model or not, they are doing risk assessments, because this is how they're figuring out where to drive their business direction, how to spend their money, what products to invest in, etc. Right? So show the execs what they're used to seeing. They're used to seeing this stuff propped up in front of them by your business people. Use their same templates. Use their same formats. Use their same color schemes, their same branding. Right? Use the tools that they have to your advantage. It sounds funny to use the same color set. I guarantee you it gets play, though. Guarantee you it does. Engage your peers and superiors on risk. Talk about what's in the media. Use sites like privacyrights.org or Have I Been Pwned, and show them these things. Oh yeah, this is out here. Use it as generation material. Don't ever let a crisis go unexploited. Right? That's a really important thing. Exploit your crises to your advantage, but not using FUD. FUD will get you nowhere. You exploit the crises to illustrate the problem and then say, how do we deal with the problem? Let's look at it in terms of risk. And that's really where your ROI is going to start. It's going to start when you start having risk conversations. You need to build a path to leadership. You need to get there. And it's not always a ladder. Sometimes it's a journey. But you need to get there. Prepare reports about what's going on in the industry around you and circulate them. Hey, you might have heard about this new thing. You might have heard about, Heartbleed. It's old, but you know what I'm saying, right? You might have heard about this. If you're bold, you might have heard about Ashley Madison. Try it. See what happens. Create a newsletter, like a security newsletter. Circulate it around. Get people talking about it. However you can get it out there so people know, whether it's a blog post or whether it's an actual form, a form on a bulletin board. It doesn't matter, because the more you communicate, the more you're in front of them, the more responsive they're going to be when you really want to engage them on something you want to engage. This is incredibly important. Keep them in the know with things that you know of. Start with your next level manager or the managers in the other departments or just people around you. Start the conversation. But you're really getting ROI in your discussion when you're doing that. Okay? Learn from the mistakes of others. Absolutely. That's why I spent so much time talking about Sony. Because you can pull that stuff out and you can go, yeah, this is the kind of stuff they did wrong. They had an email retention policy that left up to 7 years of old messages on their servers unencrypted. Show that to one of your lawyers. They will flip the freak out. 7 years of messages? They want you to delete everything right away, right? Plausible deniability. They were essentially using their email system for their long-term document storage needs because the email system was backed up, right? So people leave crap in their inboxes in billions of different folders, and they think it's a document management system. It's not. Documents need to expire. They need to expire, right? Your company has retention policies. An array of sensitive information, including usernames and passwords, were kept in unprotected spreadsheets in Word files with names like computer passwords. Show them that. You remember when Sony got hacked? Yeah, there's all this stuff. This is one of the things they did. We're doing the same thing. Can we not do that? Have those discussions. And you're going to prove the ROI when you start doing that. And then be prepared to answer questions. This is really important because you're going to get questions thrown at you. So you need to understand your data. You need to know what it takes to protect it. But let somebody else make the risk decision on it. And that's a really important thing. A lot of security managers get in this position where they're asked to make risk decisions on security type items. That is not what we should be doing. The risk managers, the security managers, should take it back to their business, back to their boards, their execs, their whoever's, their decision makers, and say, this is what I discovered. These are our options. Can you please tell me what the best option would be? What would you prefer to do? And they're most likely going to say to you, what's going to cost the least amount of time and money, and what's going to get us the most bang for our buck? You're going to already go in there with those options and know that. You're probably even going to know what they're going to pick. Because when you have control of what's being reported, you can make some things stand out with some creative wording. Right? If you want option B, make A and C look really crappy. Okay? Use sites like Have I Been Pwned and privacyrights.org to get your data. Look up media accounts of various activities. Right? Whatever you can do. All that stuff I showed you from Sony was from one single media article. Right? So somebody has done the legwork for you. Go out there, gather that data, use it to your advantage, and show it as, I'm learning from the mistakes of others, and showing you what this is all about. And then network. You're here, which is awesome. That's awesome. But keep it up. If this is the only security conference you go to this year, it's not enough. You need to keep up the network. There's Twitter, which is a big security community. There's MySec. Is anybody in here who does not know what MySec is? When they talked about it, there's a couple of people. So MySec is a group of people, including myself. They meet monthly in Southfield, which is like the Detroit metro area. There's also a MySec Jackson that meets in Jackson, Michigan, and anywhere else. It's just a community of people with the same kind of thoughts and ideas and temperaments. And we come together monthly, and we have somebody present, and we learn, right? Or if we don't learn, we talk about what's going on, and we try to learn from each other. But it's really all about making the connection and getting the understanding, a common understanding that everybody has, right? There's forum discussions. There's just asking questions. Just ask questions. Hey, have you ever heard of this thing? Have you ever seen this? How do you do this where you work? There's Swipe. Anybody know what Swipe is? Steal with integrity and pride. Right? Do it. If it's out there in the public, do it. The only thing I ask you is if somebody did it and it's not your work, don't represent it as your own. Give attribution. But absolutely say, here's some stuff that I found that's really interesting that sort of applies to what we do. And, it's good stuff, let's use it. Or use it in your materials or your security newsletters or whatever. Use that material, right? And this is really where ROI is going to get enhanced. And speaking of swipe, I'm going to introduce you to 3 pieces of collateral that I'm going to absolutely give to you, okay? Send me an email to my email address, and I will send these to you if you find them useful. Many people have done so. There are my 4 pillars: security, governance, risk, and compliance. I broke them down into 4 areas. I said, here are their key functions. Here's how we achieve those key functions, and here's the business value of those functions. You can have this. Just send me a note. Here's another piece where I took the critical success factors for the security organization, their key activities, their key interfaces, and their guiding principles. And I said we never make a decision without going back to the guiding principles. That's our security constitution. And we say when we need to do something in security or governance or risk or compliance and we need to spend money or we need to take an action, does it fit within our principles? And if it doesn't, we don't do it. And the executives know that. And they hear that and they go, oh, that's really good, right? That's our lock solid thing. And this, which turned out to be a horrible color scheme because of the theme that I used, so ignore that, is just a layered model, a visual model that I'm using to try to get these folks to understand defense in depth. Right? That's what this is. This just represents defense in depth, and it's really simple. And I go, oh, look, we have perimeter defenses, and we have managed security services, and threat detection, and we have firewalls, and we have antiviruses, and we have these end users, and we have access controls, and we have critical business data. So now you've got some talking points, and when they say, well, why did this fail? You can go, well, it's because the end user clicked something, and if they click something, you can see that they went all through all of these, and that was the problem. Now, luckily, we had some access controls, so they didn't get everything, but if we didn't have that, that would be a big deal. Our critical data would be done. It would be another Sony. Right? Again, I'll give this to you. It's fine. It's out there. You can find it too, but I'll more than happy to mail it to you. So just some final thoughts in all of this. Your job is to lower risk. That is your job as a security person, as a practitioner, as a manager, as an executive, as a whatever. Your job is to lower the risk of doing business so the business can do more and better business. Do so using positive ROI or negative ROI to shift your budget from one place to another that is positive. Emotionally detach yourself from the things that drive you nuts as an InfoSec admin or manager. I can't stress this one enough. You will go crazy because if you beat your head on the door over and over and over about, my God, these data breaches and it's going to happen to us any day, it's just going to burn you out. It's going to burn you out, you're going to be done, you're going to be spent, and it's not worth it. You have to emotionally detach yourself. I understand. Everybody wants to do a really good job. If the company is stopping you from doing a really good job, you take the Kenny Rogers route. You know when to hold them, you know when to fold them, you know when to walk away, and you know when to run. Sometimes that's what it takes. I had to do that. I was almost 3 years as a CISO, and I said I can't do it anymore. They're just not listening. So you go. Okay? Understand you are an advisor and a counselor. You should never, ever, ever be a gatekeeper. And if they look to you as a gatekeeper, change that perception. Have the conversations. I don't want to be a gatekeeper. I'm not your gatekeeper because gatekeepers make decisions on what you do with your data. It's not my data. It's your data. So let me advise you. Let me counsel you. Let me help you on what to do with that data. Okay? Your business can do business without security. They can. It's very high risk, but they can do it. And you always have to keep that in mind, right? That it's very often seen as a necessary evil. How necessary? That's up to how risky your executives want to treat your business and what they want to do. Right? So what do you do? So here's my information. Please feel free to take it down. I am interested in talking to you about anything, anytime, anywhere. Give me an email, give me a call, whatever. Yeah, I'll take questions. Is that the Rossi framework? Is that a risk framework? Yeah, I think so that Rossi framework, that is a financial framework, right? For buying security products. Am I thinking of the right thing? Okay, yeah. So I have seen that before. But like I said, your ROI is not always going to be about dollars. It might be about investments in awareness, right? Which could be all internal. You don't have to contract with a third-party company. Although, if you'd like to, please call me. I'm more than happy to help you with that. But you don't have to do that. You could do stuff internally with yourself, right? create a program, deliver a program. It's going to cost you resources internally to do that, but not really hard dollars. And I think ROSI is more about the hard dollar spend. Yeah, exactly. It's a blend of qualitative and quantitative. That's a good way to put it, right? And so some of those qualitative kinds of discussions are the ones that you really want to have. Quantitative is still important, don't get me wrong, because, you know, when security vendors are saying, oh, that'll be $275,000 for that product, you got to have a really good reason for spending that money. But you should have some qualitative efforts in there as well. If not, you know, metrics, although I don't think qualitative metrics exist. But, right, so that would definitely be a thing. You know, and you could use that to your advantage. The ROSI framework from the Australian, from the DSD, or where's it from? Yeah, from the Defense Signals Directive. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, let me leave you with one final thing then. So, this is something that I've used before that's pretty interesting and powerful. There's a picture that I found on the internet. It's this picture right here. Okay? If you look closely at this picture, what's going on is this gentleman, and this is probably from the 60s, maybe the late 50s, but he has on a pair of roller skates, which are powered by gasoline, which is kept in a tank that he straps to his back. He's obviously a business person because he's holding a briefcase, and I'm assuming that he just wants to get to work really fast or really cool, right? This is probably what this gentleman wants to do. Now, this is your visual analogy for what's going on in your world. This is your business. They want to strap on gas-powered roller skates, and they want to go down the street really, really fast, right? They want to strap it to their back. They want to use leaded gasoline, okay, to do it. And you, as a security person, have to look at that and go, okay, so that's what you want to do. If your first inclination is, oh my God, don't do that, you're going to die, you're thinking the wrong way. What you have to say to them is, that's really, really cool. Can I offer you a helmet or something just to help you with that? Because it seems like it'd be a little risky just to do it the way you're doing it here. Does that make sense? That's the kind of discussion you have to have. Use these visuals. Use this one if you want. Like I said, I stole this from, there's a great Twitter account called Historical Pics, and they tweet stuff all the time, and whenever I find stuff, I grab it and I try to use it in these analogies. But this one is fantastic. Here's what I say. I say, this is either the worst example of risk management I've ever seen, or it's the greatest example of risk acceptance I've ever seen. It's one of those two, and you have to decide where you're at, and you have to decide how you're going to handle it. But that's the reality of what we deal with. Okay? So when we talk about data breaches, and we talk about how tough they are to deal with, they are tough to deal with, and if nobody's listening, you got to figure out a way to make them listen, or you got to go somewhere else and have them listen to you. Thank you very much.